Thanks for watching this presentation, and don't forget to like this video. Please leave your comments and subscribe to the channel for previous videos and more videos coming to our RailFan playlist.
My name is McCarthy. I am the Executive Director of the Depot. They say I need to be louder. Is that a little better?
Oh, yeah.
Is that perfect?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I'm McCarthy. I'm the Cheyenne Depot Museum Executive Director. We welcome you all tonight to our event. We're really excited about this weekend. I think we're going to have some great weather. We've had a very busy week. I don't know if anybody has seen, but we have done some renovations in the depot. In the last 6 months, we've worked on some new things. We have a back patio now. We have a new kitchen, and we do have new doors and new bathroom facility. We've renovated the bathrooms as well. So there's lots going on here. We have a ribbon cutting this week. But tonight, we're here for the Depot Days event. So what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce our speaker, and then after he's done, we probably will take a quick break, and then we will have another speaker coming. So our first speaker is Ed Dickens from the Steam Shop. I don't think I need to say a lot more. You all know who he is. So I'm going to go ahead and
Thank you very much. And thank you, Donna. Thank you, everyone, for having this event. It's so fun for us getting set up. And we always look forward to opening the shop. As we talk all the time, whenever we have tours, that there's not a museum over there. So it's special that we have the opportunity to make it available for public tours, and especially for Depot Days. Well, I'd like to start to talk about just the big boy in general. And there's lots of questions on social media that we get, and I thought tonight might be a nice opportunity maybe to field some of those questions that maybe you've had about the big boy, how we started rebuilding it, how we run it, any questions at all. So we can talk a lot about that. Any questions you have about the 844 or any of the support equipment? And we've got a hand up already. Yes, sir.
How do you treat water? Because you have dissimilar metals and water will corrode if you don't treat it with something.
I missed the first part of that. I got the water part. What was the first part of your question?
It's a steam engine with dissimilar metals.
Water treatment?
Naturally corrode.
Okay, so
But
those...
water makes it worse.
Yes. His question was about water treatment, and that's a very, very important part of any old steam locomotive. And so I go back on the crew 21 years, and I've worked on other steam locomotives, and I'm just kind of a steam geek, I guess. And when I assumed this role as manager, I put myself to some pretty comprehensive training and schooling, so to speak, learning about water treatment, because we've had problems with the 844 and then the 3985, but particularly the 844 had suffered some pretty significant scale buildup and corrosion on the inside of the boiler. So what we do is we process our water through a water softening system. And without getting overly technical, everybody who lives in hard water parts of the country knows what hard water does to your plumbing, your water heater, all of those things. Well, imagine on a steam locomotive is the ultimate water heater because it's processing hundreds of gallons per minute. And when I say processing, I mean that it's generating that water, it's heating it, turning it into a medium for power, steam. So there's a lot of stuff that's in the water that's going to stay in the boiler where the really nice, pure, clean water goes out of the boiler, used to operate the pumps, the dynamo, the injectors, and most importantly, propel the locomotive. So it's important that you remove all that gunk out of the water and not put it in the first place. So that's how we do it. We add a few chemicals. So Mother Nature oxygenates water. That's just the way our world functions. Well, on a steam locomotive, that oxygen, that free oxygen in the water is very damaging to the metal. So So that's another chemical additive that we put in there. We've got oxygen scavenger and water treatment. Did that answer your question, sir?
It does.
Okay.
It's a start anyway. I was a former public works director in Colorado that do water and wastewater treatment. Sounds exactly like cooperative.
Yeah, I'm fascinated with water treatment facilities. And we've actually will have in place next year a filter system to supplement that water softening system. So it's not quite reverse osmosis, it'll be nanofiltration, and it'll be a very scientific way to clean up our water. The idea is that we've invested in this big locomotive and we want to do everything we can to operate it and ensure its longevity. So for those that aren't familiar with the Big Boy steam locomotive, the Big Boy is known as the world's largest operating steam engine. And I kind of smirk a little bit when I say that because I know it will invite conversation that one engine was bigger and other things like that. How many people have driven by the 4004 down here in the park? It's a big locomotive, isn't it? Well, the Big Boys were purpose-built. Just like today, not too far, just to my right out here, is the Transcontinental Railroad of the Union Pacific. That railroad, from its inception, was looking for ways to haul freight fast and, of course, efficient. We've got competition out there, and they're looking for ways to do their business efficient as well. So we're always on that cutting edge of designing the equipment to be efficient and big and powerful. And that's what the Big Boys were designed and built for. I think when they had them on the drawing board, I don't think anybody was looking at any type of record, or they weren't looking to make some big machine from a public relations standpoint. They just needed a locomotive to do a big job. That's what the Big Boys did. They built 20 of them initially, and they were delivered in the year 1941, just before the outbreak of World War II. And they were a very successful machine. They needed more of them. So they had 5 more built. They bought 5 additional locomotives in the year 1944. We're very lucky that they saved 8 out of the 25 have been preserved. And we restored the 4014. The project started officially in 2013, and the months leading up, the end of 2012 actually, we began talking about restoring a Big Boy. And that was an offshoot of the conversations that I was having regarding rebuilding the 3985. For those of you who are familiar with that locomotive, it's a class smaller. How many people know what the wheel arrangement the Big Boy is? So when you look at the wheels, all right, there's just a few hands there. So I'll help explain what that means. Steam locomotives are classified by their wheel arrangement, the number of wheels under the locomotives. Our modern locomotives are as well, but because all of the wheels on a modern locomotive provide traction, we don't think about it the way we do with a steam locomotive. So a Big Boy steam locomotive has 4 leading wheels, which do not propel the locomotive. And then it has a first set of 8 drivers. Then it has a second engine with a second set of 8 drivers, and then 4 wheels under the cab called a trailing truck. So it's a 4-8-8-4. The 844, which is a magnificent locomotive, the very last steam locomotive that the Union Pacific purchased in December of 44. That locomotive is a 4-8-4. So going back to the conversation that I had with some very key decision-making senior vice president when we began talking about restoring a Big Boy locomotive, I needed to have him understand, sir, this is 2 844s. And that's how I left that conversation. So we're talking about a big locomotive. And oftentimes when I'm explaining it to people who have an understanding of the 844, That's how I explain it. This locomotive is really no exaggeration. The boiler pressure, which is the power output of that big, giant cylindrical boiler, is 300 pounds of pressure. The Challenger class was 280. The Challenger cylinders were 21 inches. The 844s were 25. And the big boy is just slightly under that at 24. That kind of gives you a sense of the power of that locomotive. So we began bringing the locomotive back here. It was a really exciting journey. I remember when we first publicly announced that, I remember there was so much speculation about how it was going to occur, if it was even real, because so many people had talked over the years. Pardon me, I've got my devices here. I've got these really fancy machine and then it syncs to my phone. Getting all this feedback. But it was a very fun time for us because in my position I have part of my responsibility is planning where we're going to run the locomotives. And in this case, we're going to bring back the locomotive that hasn't operated since the 1950s. So that was just a really a fun time for me. Dealing with all the internal people, talking and having conversations about moving the big boy back, and it was a really exciting time. Once we got the locomotive back here, we actually pulled right into track one right out here, and we had a nice event with the mayor, the city council. You remember that day, Donna? You remember that event? It was fun. But the whole city of Cheyenne could see, for the first time since the 1970s, there was two big boys in Cheyenne. One in the park, the 4004, and the 4014. So it's just been a fun process. You notice that hesitation when I said the word fun. But it actually is. There's a lot of hard work with all of this equipment and all the big equipment. And having the opportunity to work on it in the shop right over there. As you'll see, for those of you coming into the depot days tomorrow, we have the engine and tender separated. That's part of the annual work that we do. And we've got all the big parts laid out between the engine and tender. You'll see all the big giant components there. But it's really unique because you can look and you can see the air brakes, and we'll be there to answer any questions you might have. Well, does anyone have any more questions? Don't be shy. Yes, sir.
Why did you pick the 14?
Question was, why did I pick the 4014? Well, I had actually been in California on business in 2011, and I remember looking at the website, and they had the 9000, which is a 3-cylinder locomotive. For those that aren't familiar with steam engines, they're typically an articulated was 4 cylinders, like the big boy. A non-articulated locomotive, like the 844, has 2 cylinders. Well, and that museum has the only surviving 3-cylinder locomotive from the Union Pacific in the world. They at one time had 88 of these big machines, and regrettably all but one was scrapped. And I, over the years of my interest in railroading, developed a real interest in the technological development of the steam locomotive. And you can't study steam engines without studying the lifelong interest of the 3-cylinder machine. I wanted to see that one. And of course, I wanted to take a look at the big boy. In my job, I'm looking for parts and looking for things, and sometimes you find a little gem here and there. And I remember looking at the big boy as it sat out there. What impressed me the most was that it was in California. And it was far enough away from the salt water that it was pretty well preserved. And the owner, the Rail Giants Museum, the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society, had taken good care of it. They cleaned all the insulating flagging off the jacket, they painted it really good, they had it on a nice display. I just kind of tucked that away in my head. Well, it wasn't but a few months later that we began talking about restoring the big boy. And I knew some of the conditions of the other ones, I'd seen a few others, and I figured this one is really going to be a good candidate. The one that was here in Cheyenne had been submerged in water a time or two, and I had physically looked at that one, and there was just some other factors there. It would have been really easy to pick that one up in retrospect, but I figured we'll go after that one. So that's a long explanation, but I know there's a lot of detailed people out there, so I always try to provide a lot of information in my answer. Very good. Yes, sir?
I believe you've been operating 6 seasons, right? With the big boy has been out 6 operating seasons now. How many miles have you put on it?
Just under 21,000 miles. So back in the days when they were running these locomotives, when it was earning its keep for the Union Pacific, with all its brothers and sisters out there in the roster, 21,000 miles was probably 3 months worth of mileage, give or take, depending on the season. And those 21,000 miles, the locomotive has seen millions and millions of people. It is just a remarkable, all steam locomotives are fascinating to watch. And as we get more into the years that we're living, the steam locomotive on the main line was pretty rare, a very rare occurrence. And oftentimes people remark that they're amazed to see anything operating like that. Not to mention that it's traveling on a Class 1 network such as the UP. So that's a very fun comment that we get. 21,000 miles, yes ma'am.
And it was history. It was history. It was made back when cars weren't there. So it's part of our American.
That's right, yeah, our American heritage, the history, and the wonderful history of the Union Pacific Railroad. Very important. This one of the most strategic links started in 1862 by our 16th president, President Abraham Lincoln.
You mentioned there were 8 surviving big boys. So out of those 8, when you were getting rolling on 2014, how many of those did you guys have access to, to research? And then were you also really cautious about scavenging parts from those other units, or you needed something? Were you just going to totally remanufacture it? Keep the other ones kind of were there some parts that you snagged from the other ones and put on for?
His question was during the process of looking at the locomotive. So I didn't go look at the other ones. Over the course of a few years when I started this role, I was in Dallas. I saw the 4018, and I was aware of the other ones that had sat outside in cold climates. They're kind of, locked away in museums. I was aware of the one in Denver. So I knew that they wouldn't really represent a good candidate. The second part of his question was, what about all the parts that we're going to need? Well, that was pretty simple. So when I started this job, I had worked in a few machine shops, and I really enjoy welding and machining. I actually built a railroad for myself. It's an amusement park type railroad, 15-inch gauge. I really enjoy making things and welding and fabricating. Machining, it's just fascinating for me. Well, when the conversation to restore a big boy was first discussed, as I mentioned earlier, it was on the heels of the conversation about the 3985. And that conversation was a discussion about the need to rebuild this locomotive completely. And so, along with that is the business case, the justification for spending the money on a locomotive that's been running for years. Just like any locomotive, the way I explained it, it's just like all the other locomotives in our fleet. Locomotive has not been thoroughly disassembled and rebuilt since it was in operation from the 1930s. And having been an engineer that ran it, I can attest to how worn out it was. And therefore, not to fear, let's rebuild it. So we had that part of the conversation had already taken place. I already had the green light to rebuild that locomotive. And then the conversation shifts to a big boy. And as a reminder, when we were having that initial dialogue, I want to do it right. And I want to take this locomotive completely apart. And that response was enthusiastically met with a smile and a pleasing head nod. So, in my liking, that's a tremendous opportunity to do exactly what we needed to do. So if you take parts off of a locomotive that is in a park, that locomotive was worn out when they put it in the park. So if you take a worn out part and you put it on your locomotive, you've got a worn out part on your locomotive. And you can machine it, you can weld it, and fix those parts up. Why not make new parts? And that was the right decision, because that's one of the driving factors that allowed us to get that locomotive rebuilt in only 2.5 years. Because you're not spending a lot of labor, you're not welding and reworking old parts. Now you may be thinking, well, it's just a metal part. Over time, age is pretty kind to some metal components. Other metal components, it's not kind. It rusts and bends and warps. Remember the big boy, the 4014 had 1,033,000 miles on it. So it's pretty worn out. And if you do the math on that number, you quickly learn how many times they had taken that locomotive apart and put it back together again. And we saw that when we started to take it apart. The parts were welded up, machined, put back together, welded up, machined, put back together, again and again and again. These bolts were taken out, replaced. Some of the bolts weren't. And just go down the list of the thousands of parts on a steam locomotive. You've got a worn out machine. So it's really exciting and fun to make whatever new parts we needed. And in my mind, didn't matter what those new parts were, how big they were, how long it would take to do it, and whatever it would take to do it, that's what we were going to do. And that's why the 4014, I think one of the reasons people are so interested in it is that it's a lot of new parts on that thing. And that's why it runs so well. And when we run out there, we take off and we go for a month. And we hit just about every single spot right on time. Because that's what they want us to do. We can't get out there and have problems. So it's fun. Very long answer, but did I answer your question? Okay. Question right up front here, sir.
I've got a question about operations. One of the most, I wasn't there, we're from Nebraska. But when you use 4014 as a helper out of Blair on that grade, what's the percentage of that grade? And what kind of a challenge was it to operate that as a, pushing that engine as that train up that grade?
His question was, here a few years ago, we had an opportunity to push a train that had stalled in Blair, Nebraska, which is on the Blair subdivision between Missouri Valley and Fremont, Nebraska. So that's right up my alley. I started my mainline railroad career running helpers back before we had the modern technology that we have today. And it was one of the most enjoyable aspects of being a locomotive engineer. I worked out of Denver, that's where my engineer seniority is. So in my 20s, I was an engineer down there, and I'll go into a little bit of a story about my seniority. So I was fortunate enough to hire out on the Southern Pacific Rio Grande in 1993. At that time, I was working with the Durango and Silverton, working on steam engines down there, and I was just loving it. And so the Rio Grande had not hired anyone since 1981. So there was a big block of seniority there, and they needed people. And so when I started, my class, all of us student brakemen, conductors, we were like a novelty. They were so excited to be able to hire employees, and they kind of took us under their wing. Well, right away, It's all based on union seniority. And there was a few classes for engineers. And you have to submit a bid. And sure enough, here comes a bid. And for those of you who've ever worked on the railroad, there's a lot of scuttlebutt rumors, lots of speculation. And I remember some of the older folks, what we call the old heads. I'm an old head now. That terminology means someone who's been around the railroad. Jim's worked on the railroad for years. He remembers a lot of this. And so the folks were saying, oh, don't put in for that class, kid. You'll get forced to Pueblo. And at that time, they were forcing people to work Tennessee Pass. I thought it would be cool to go work Tennessee Pass. Well, I didn't listen to them. I immediately put in for that class, and I got it. Well, sorry for the long explanation, but it's a fun story. There was about 20 people that I ended up getting over them on seniority. And they'd all worked for the railroad for 20 plus years. So next thing you know, this new kid engineer is now an engineer, and they all submitted their bid behind me, and they were in the class behind me. So I had good seniority almost from the beginning, and that enabled me to work the cool jobs, these man helpers. And so what we do, you work a set of locomotives. For those of you that are into the modern locomotive types, over in the yard in Cheyenne, those locomotives that are moving the cars, shuttling of the cars about, you'll see them, they're yellow. Those are called SD40-2s. Well, that was the mainstay of our fleet when I was a young engineer. Well, we'd take two of those. They were painted Rio Grande, really cool paint job, big orange stripes on the front of them, and a neat sounding horn. You can tell I like this job. So I did man helpers all the time, hundreds, maybe 1,000 times, maybe more. That's all we did, day in and day out. You'd get a call on a helper, and you'd go down to where we pick up the locomotives in the yard in Denver, and they'd have two engines sitting there ready to go, and I'd go get on them. I remember being so gung-ho. I haven't changed a bit. I drive people crazy. I'm so gung-ho. My guys are usually, they be rolling their eyes. So I'd get on these locomotives, and I remember back then we could run light engines, passenger train speed. And I was qualified to run between Denver and Grand Junction. One of the few guys on the extra board that was qualified all that way. So it was a fun time. So back to this fateful day, I have, at that time, our big vice president was riding with us in the cab. And the dispatcher called us up on the radio. And like I had mentioned, I've been on the railroad a long time. And because of my interest and my enthusiasm, I know all kinds of little ins and outs and all the lingo. And I can listen to that radio and pick out conversations that are happening all over the place and begin to sense a potential problem. And I'm always listening for issues because I've got to run this big boy on time. And I might be able to chime in and help out. But on this particular day, the dispatcher calls up. And the train that was having problems was too far away. We could only hear one side of the conversation. Dispatcher calls up, UP dispatcher 4014. And I talk on the radio. Sometimes the pilot conductor will, depending on what the conversation is. 4014, come in, over. Does that thing have a coupler on the front of it? Can you knuckle into a train? That's typically not the lingo we use, but I knew exactly what he meant. And I couldn't wait to say, yes, we can. And then there's a break for about 10 minutes. And I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be good. But he calls back and says, we got a train up here. You know, it's stalled out. Can you get behind and give it a push? What am I going to say? No, you're going to have to call somebody else. Are you kidding me? I love the UP. I just came back from a business trip, got back last night pretty late. I love the Union Pacific. I love my call, the different people that I get to meet. And I was in a class, it was a month-long class, and it required 2-week-long periods of attendance there in Omaha. And there's 25 of us in this class, and it's so inspiring hearing what they do. The law department, supply, operating, there's superintendents, senior directors, all these people. And I just love this place. So when the dispatcher wants me to help, I can't contain my enthusiasm. Well, sitting right behind me in the locomotive is the big boss. And then I had already committed ourselves and we were headed to the problem, and then I figured, well, maybe I should ask for permission. It's more or less a formality.
I thought that was the 10-minute cap.
Yeah. No, we were well on our way, and then there was other guests in the cab, and then so we had a moment, we stopped, and then I explained what we were about to do, and I said, you mind if we do that? Sure, if you think so. And he's got a wonderful radio announcer voice. So that's what we did. We pulled up behind there, and I made contact with the train. I talked to the dispatcher. The modern signal systems allow the dispatcher to just give you what we call a restricting signal. So we didn't need to have a conversation about all kinds of other stuff. But we have PTC. So what PTC prevents you from getting too close to another train. So there's a certain thing you do, to let the PT system know, hey, we're going to get close to this train and we want to get close to it. So that's what we did. We got it behind it. And right about that time I thought, well, what if it's too heavy and the engines up front are broken pretty good. There's one of them, they had 2. And they can't get that other one. So I'm thinking to myself, we're sure going to look bad if this doesn't work out. But I just dismissed that thought. Because the 4014 is a big locomotive, I asked the conductor what the makeup was. I wanted to know what I'm pushing against from my days of being a helper engineer. I don't want to push, cause damage to a light car. And we got up behind it and didn't mess around at all, just like you would in any other railroading scenario. No fanfare, no drama. Get up behind it, disconnect the air hose to the EOT, the little flashing box on the back, jump up in there. I made my preparations with my air brake, reach back to the 1941 air brake, cut it out just like you would on any engine. And I called him and I said the same thing you would have said. Helpers on, we're ready. But I got a passenger train behind me, which is a minor detail. So off we go. And there were people down on the ground. And one of the tricks, in that scenario, that train I think was 11,000 tons, 10,000 feet long. And in that scenario, once you begin pushing on it, as that locomotive up there is pulling, it's only one locomotive. And it's going to be able to exert only its pulling force. So you're going to have to push a very significant amount of tonnage to compensate for the other engine that's broken. So this isn't going to be just a little show. We are going to exert significant force to get this job done. Well, the other thing, when the engine starts going over the top up there, if the steam engine slips a little bit, which invariably it can, what happens is there's a momentary pause in the force that you're applying on that train. And at that moment, you could break a coupling. So it's critical that I run the engine to get the job done, but not excessively, which will cause it to slip too much. And as it worked out, it slipped a few times and was no big deal. When a steam engine slips, you can actually sense it in the quick microseconds before. It's a feel that you acquire. It's in your seat, it's in your hands, it's in the cab. You can feel it when it starts to lose its footing. Steamage is a fascinating machine to run. It's not like a modern machine out here. There's a lot of skill and experience to run these machines. But they slip and it takes care of it all by itself. You don't do anything except maybe push the sand button in an extreme situation. Steam locomotive, you're running at 100% by feel. And the unique thing about it, a big boy, is, as I mentioned, it's two 844s. So it's making this really cacophonous industrial sound because you're working hard. And that 300 tons of steam pressure, the other neat thing about it is as it's working hard, it gets everything up front really hot. And you can start to see that heat radiating off. We're talking 800 degrees. I mean, this is tremendous heat. And that's normal. It goes over the hot box detectors and they just blow up. And everybody's like, oh my gosh. Sometimes dispatchers have actually called worried. And when you tell them it's normal, they're like, what? This thing is setting off every alarm I have on my subdivision. And you're telling me it's normal to be 200 degrees? I want you to stop and check it. Just make me feel good. I've actually had them tell me that. I'm like, no, we're good. So that's what we did. We pushed that engine up to the top, and it got some really good video that our big boss and others had taken in the cab while we were doing it. So the engine, because of the way that it develops its power, it gets into sync. I call it the articulated effect. So it actually does not sound like it's articulated. So with a 2-cylinder locomotive, the cylinders are double acting, so you get 4 exhaust pulses with every revolution of the wheel. So for the musicians in here, it's a 4/4 tempo. Dum, 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 dum. Articulated gets in sync, and both of those engines are pulling in unison. And one of them's quarter slips or will slip, and now it's out of sync. And that's when it sounds kind of cool. Cha-hop, 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 cha-hop. But when it's working really hard, it sounds like the old videos that we've all seen. But within 1 or 2 revolutions, it's right back in sync again. And the whole engine, when you're sitting in it, it's literally shifting. You can feel the thrust of both engines. And you can see that as we're pushing it. And there's a boxcar right in front of us. And you can just kind of see us. And you can see the microphone cable swaying, and it just leaned into this train. As far as it knew, it was back in 1944, 1949, all over again. There's a fun time.
Percentage grade.
It's under 1%, right about in there. And the crews, they talk about that a lot. Yes, Jim.
The real cause or the set of units.
Yes. Yeah, the question was what caused that? And things break down. And I'm happy to say it was not a Union Pacific locomotive that broke down. It was one of our competitors that we were using. We were using that locomotive on a return mileage basis. And as an engineer, you know when the engine is no good anymore. It happens to me a lot. Things happen. Sir? Yes, sir, with the hat.
Do you have to carry a high pressure and low pressure license? And how does the big boy compare traction to the Norfolk Western Fly-6?
Okay, what was your first part of your question?
Do you have to carry a high pressure, low pressure license?
License?
Yeah.
No. No, his question was, I think you're referring to like a stationary boiler's operating license or that. No, we don't. On the mainline railroads, there is no steam locomotive certification. Maybe someday there will be. We're working an internal steam locomotive qualification for locomotive engineers. And the second part of your question, the Y6B is another one of my favorite locomotives. So the tractive force on those, you might have to help me on that. I think compound, weren't they like 150,000? Something like, or excuse me, simple. For what I'm talking about is that this is a locomotive that the Norfolk and Western designed and built that uses the steam 2 times. On the big boy, the big boy uses the steam 1 time. So it's used once, exhausted right out the stack. And the early part of the last century, the railroads were always looking to be efficient, and they wanted to be able to use the steam multiple times, like on a ship. For the earlier ships, they had like a triple expansion. What that meant is the steam is used 1 time here, it's used again, it's used again, and then it's used again to go through a turbine, like on the Titanic. For those that are understand how the Titanic engines work. So the railroads were looking for that efficiency, and that's why they designed those. From a low-speed pulling standpoint, the Y6B exerted greater tractive force. When it was simple, meaning you turn a valve and you put live steam in the big cylinders of the compound engine, it could really put a hurting on you. It just couldn't do it for very long.
Did you have original working drawings or specifications to help with restoration?
His question was, do we have the original drawings? And the answer is yes. The Union Pacific very thoughtfully, in the mid-1970s, had gone through their engineering offices, and they came across all these drawings, squirreled away on all these different floors, all these different offices of the engineering department. Well, rather than just roll them up in a dumpster and just shuttle them out the door, they painstakingly microfilmed those. And there they sat in an archive until the 1990s, when the Union Pacific Historical Society, very thankfully, painstakingly went and scanned all those drawings. So anybody who's interested can go to the Union Pacific Historical Society website, and you can buy a CD of all the big drawings. They're not all there, but all the important ones are. And it's fun. Over the years, I know that database very well, and I've been in it looking countless times. So yes, we've got the drawings. The ones we don't, you just got to use a little bit of good old-fashioned reverse engineering common sense and draw it up and make it.
Will any of these others be rebuilt as technology advances in machining and welding so they can be rebuilt?
Are you referring to the other big boys?
Other big boys and the 3 cylinders in California.
So to answer your question, his question was, with all the technology they would have, that we would build a steam locomotive. For entertainment purposes only, yes, I'm sure. There's actually a locomotive back east called a T1. It's in the process of being built from the ground up. The British have built a beautiful 3-cylinder locomotive. If I ever win a big lottery, you know, I like smaller locomotives because it's within my ability, my one person fit it in your garage kind of a thing. That's what I like. But with the welding technology and 3D printing, making patterns, you know, there is so much really fascinating technology out there that if you have the financial ability, you're limited only by what your imagination will tell you.
You touched on some of the safety equipment. What about, other than PPE, what is in guard in case you get hit by lightning?
Okay, his question was about our safety equipment. So we have what's known as positive train control. That's an electronic system, a computer-based, infrastructure-based computer system that we have on all trains now, required by Congress. All railroads must have the route depending on other criteria. So if the big boy were to get struck by lightning, is that, well, it depends on anything. All bets are off with a lightning strike. You know, that the voltages and with an average storm that we see in our lives that we take for granted, those lightning strikes are just amazing. Millions of voltages and the tremendous power. Boy, we just hope that nothing too bad is fried. But if it is, we carry with us, knock on wood, a lot, nearly a complete second set of PTC gear. I brought with me yesterday, I took them with me when I went back to Omaha, some computer equipment to allow my colleagues to, we call it flashing and reprofiling, and they simply updated some of the gear. Because the big boy is sitting over there unplugged. So that computer system goes to sleep. Just like your home computer. It sits there, you may let it sit for months and months, and you fire it up and it boots itself up. First thing it wants to do is wire. It wants to install the latest operating system. Well, the same thing with the PTC systems, always needing a software upgrade. So I want to get ahead of that. And so when we go to plug it in here in a few weeks and turn it all on again, it's not going to sit there for 6 hours and update. Answer your question?
So talk about the difference between the effect the big boy has on the track compared to these locomotives there. It's quite a bit different.
His question was, what effect does this big, fabulous locomotive have on the track structure? So the axle loading is pretty close. And what the axle loading means is the weight per axle. So on these big engines out here, they're about 420,000 pounds. The big boy is 1.2 million pounds, but that's on 19 axles instead of 6. So the actual loading itself isn't any heavier, but it's the combined effect of all those axles. So if you, in your mind, visualize the big boy moving over a bridge. And the bridges are designed with a specific span that each part of that bridge structure is supporting, and it's designed to take the combined weight of those loads. Well, when you get into the bigger bridges and the bigger spans, it's interesting to note when they designed many of those bridges, we're talking back in the 1920s, the biggest locomotives we had back then weren't nearly as big as half of the big boy. But they still designed and calculated having multiple locomotives coupled together to cross those bridges safely. But that's a part of the analysis that I do with my engineering colleagues. We take a look at everything. The other part of a steam locomotive is when you look at it, it has those connecting rods on it. And if you take a close look at the wheel, you'll see this crescent moon-shaped metallic looking part of that wheel. That's called a counterbalance. And on a steam locomotive, it's not perfect. It's not like an automobile engine, like a high-performance engine where they balance the crankshaft. For those of you that are into rebuilding cars, really get off into the science of that. Well, they were doing that with steam locomotives, but it's not really perfected. So as a result, there are those little dynamic load events, what we call them, as those wheels are going down the track. And you can feel it in the cab. The main driver is 20,000 pounds. And on the big boy, we have a main driver on the front engine, and you have a main driver on the rear engine. So as that thing's going down the track, you can feel all that stuff.
How long does it usually take to repair the parts broken or damaged?
His question was, how long does it take us to fix things that are broken?
There's no if you're not in the station.
If what?
If you're not in the station.
Oh, if we're not in the station? Well, we really try not to break anything that we can avoid. I mean, that goes without saying. But things happen. Stuff happens. So, for example, when we were traveling last year, we were returning, moving the locomotive eastward over Donner Pass. We struck a big tree. And the tree, even though that locomotive is this massive cast steel rock crusher on wheels, it's got some vulnerable parts down low. And those parts were vulnerable back in the 40s. You had a rock slide up here at Dale Junction or anywhere on the UP. Well, the very front part of the engine has a step on it. And that step is designed to protect all those parts. Problem is that tree took out that step. And that tree trunk was this big around. And it was a live tree. Just some weird thing, this phenomenon. It snapped off, fell down, and sat there for 20 minutes, and here we came. And that tree trunk wiped out those parts, all 6 of them. So we had to make them. So we carry our tools and our supplies, and we're prepared to make just about a lot of big stuff. But, to answer your question? We prefer not to fix it on the side of a mountain, but we absolutely will to get going again, because we're the Union Pacific, and we can handle it. What about the tree? Chainsaw. We actually did have some chainsaws with us, but the track inspector, because that happens from time to time. Now remember, typically a tree like that, a regular train doesn't have the ability to stop as quick as we do. And you're probably just going to grind right through it. And it's going to break it up and push it over to the side and move it out of the way enough. And it could derail. There is always that chance. But most trains, when they go through there, they blast right through the tree. Well, we blasted through it, but we were almost stopped. We just about got stopped before we hit it. Yes, young man?
How many chainsaws did it take to get through the
It only took 2. We had an electric one, and the track inspector behind us had a nice still chainsaw with a good sharp chain on it. And I got nice video and pictures in the cab watching right through that tree. We actually had to back up a little bit because part of the tree was stuck underneath. We wanted to get all that out of there, and, Yes, ma'am.
I want to go back to the big push. Did you get a high five from a big man who was in the gallery?
Her question was back to the big push. I remember he was communicating with other executives, kind of like a proud papa. It was a fun time for everybody. We were lucky to be of assistance, and as I said, my love for the railroad it has not faded in 37 years. And so for me, I'm always looking for ways. We've actually helped quite a bit with the steam locomotive. Anytime there's a train that's stopped and somebody's out walking, I'll call them. Again, I'm listening. There's a train right up here. And you've been hearing this ongoing dialogue, and the conductor's out. We'll pull up, and I'll tell them, we got a tool car, what do you need? We got wrenches and tools and air brake hoses, and I got several guys. We can jump down and help whatever you got, and in minutes have you on your way. So we've done that.
Why does Big Boy, and I believe the Challenger, have dual flues?
Why does the big boy have what?
Have dual flues on their
Twin stacks?
Yeah.
What he's talking about is the twin stack design. That was part of the design, the engineering philosophy of that era, and Union Pacific had studied the development of the steam locomotive and how to make those locomotives operate the most efficient way possible. And by reducing the back pressure of the engine, that's the steam. Once it's done its work, remember that it just goes once and then it's out. Well, on its way out, it represents a volume of steam that's in the way of the steam that's getting ready to come out. So you want to get it out of there as quick as you can, but you also want to use it one more time. And you're using it to create pressure, which draws air into the fire. So there's a whole scientific thought that goes into the twin stack design. Some railroads didn't subscribe to it. For example, the Challenger class had gone to, the Rio Grande actually had some just like the 3985, and they went to Clinchfield. And the Clinchfield didn't like it, so they converted it to single stack. The Rio Grande had some during World War II, and they were said to not like that. Who knows what's behind that? Sometimes railroads were pretty proprietary about things. Other times they're just proud. Oh, we don't like that. That's Union Pacific. Ah, we don't need that. We're going to do this. But I can say it's a very good design. It looks cool too, doesn't it? The UP is neat stuff. Amazing, amazing stuff. Some of my mentors, when I was a young person in my 20s, they were in their 70s, and they had worked on the railroad. And several of them, in the early part of their careers, were furloughed. And one came up to work on the Union Pacific. Couldn't believe it, where he was working. One little line, doing what they do. He came up to the Union Pacific, and there's 2 rail lines, 2 tracks. One eastbound, one westbound. And these giant fleet of big, powerful, fast locomotives. Just couldn't believe it. Huge, giant shops. Thousands of people working 24/7. Locomotives coming and going, smoke everywhere, steam, coal, sand, water. What an amazing industry. You know, imagine growing up and starting your career like that. It's all a distant memory. We see pictures, I read books, but you know, to hear them tell those stories about how impressed they were coming to work for the Union Pacific. I remember as a young person, my family would take vacations and we'd drive from Colorado up to Yellowstone, and I always loved trains. I remember, I couldn't have been 5 or 6, I drove up into Laramie, and I grew up down on the Rio Grande in Denver. And those trains were going, what I thought, fast, going up through the mountains. This industrious noise and the neat sound of those engines. We came up to Laramie, and I don't know what I was thinking. I just, as a little kid, I go running over the tracks. Get on the track. But this train came flying around this curve. There's a blind curve at Laramie, I'll never forget it. Had a DD-40 on the front with the yellow light on there, and that thing was actually, it looked like it was leaning. Like a photograph. And that thing scared me to death. That's the Union Pacific. Can you tell I like it?
The operating time on the track, how do the other cars get on the track itself? The amount of time that this one runs on the track, do you need the other big boys that have been run that much?
No, there's no other big boys that have been restored.
Oh.
This is the only one. Yeah. And we like to run it. We get to run it a lot. This year, we haven't announced our travel plans. We'll be announcing those very soon. We're just going to run just 2 smaller trips this year. But next year, stand by for some really fascinating announcements. Does anyone happen to know what is significant about next year?
250th anniversary.
1776, 2026. Our 250th birthday of this great country. So we're talking about doing some really fun things. And of course, I've got lots of ideas to help them.
Can I give you another one?
I'm sorry?
Can I give you another idea?
Yes.
If you ever, could you make metal with Abraham Lincoln on the front, on the rim, have the word, tricentennial or whatever, when the railroad was started and finished, with stars, and on the back side had the Union Pacific logo.
I like that. I have in my car.
I think it would start the steam program, and you could have as many or as few engineers as you want for free.
So that's a very good idea. And how many people are aware of this interesting occurrence? We have recently painted a locomotive, and it's numbered 1616. And it's a beautiful paint job, Abraham Lincoln. And down on the flank is his portrait, his likeness, a very iconic likeness. I remember, this is an interesting story. As a very young boy, I remember my mother used to read lots of stories to me, and we were talking about presidents, and she was talking about President Lincoln. And I asked her, well, why is he only on the penny? This great man, he's on the penny. Why wouldn't we put him on the dollar? And she said to me, he goes, how many pennies do we see? Everybody has lots of pennies. That's why he's on the penny. Because he is so important that's the most prolific coin we have. And I never forgot the way she explained it to me, because in my little 6-year-old mind, it made perfect sense. Such a great president. Well, here we are. We're going to have the opportunity. It's also interesting to note, for those who follow the happenings of the steam program, we used to use a locomotive just like these other engines out here, called an SD70. Happens to be my favorite engine type other than a steam locomotive. So if we're going to take one, why don't we take one that has kind of a neat number to it? So I made some phone calls, and my colleagues sent the 4015 to run with the 4014. So we cleaned it up a little bit, but we didn't want it to be too clean, because we're a working railroad. We work. We're a business that's in the business of getting our engines dirty because we're working. So we cleaned it a little bit, but it looked a little bit weathered, and I like that. So we painted the trucks, which is where the wheels are. We painted those silver so it would match the rest of our train. We painted the hood green, and that used to be the paint scheme in the 1970s. And then we made a nice logo, just like the logo, the big plate you see on the front of the big boy, 4014. We made one just like that, said 4015, and we put it down on the flank, the very flank where Abraham Lincoln is now residing. So the 4015, I'm proud to say, was repainted as the 1616. A great tribute to a great president.
Was the big boy ever run with coal?
Was the big boy?
Everyone run with coal?
Yes, the big boys were originally designed and built as coal burners, and we converted it to burn oil. Well, I think we've got just a few more questions. Jared, did you have a question over here? No questions? Okay. Couple more, yes, sir.
Does UP give you a pretty good budget?
Excuse me. Does UP give us good funding? Yes, they do. We're very, very thankful for the funding they give us. And we're very thrifty, and we pinch our pennies like every other line of business on the railroad, but we're very thankful for the funding they give us. And each year we talk about what we're doing and what we need to do and what we'd like to do. And so we're just very privileged. Because remember, we don't need to do this. This isn't some necessary function. I would argue that the necessary function is public relations, but there's other ways you could spend the public relation dollars. So we're very happy that they see the value in how we spend the 4014 gallivanting about impressing people.
I had a similar question. I was just wondering, did you have to submit a budget to your superiors when you started this project? It must have been huge.
His question was, did you have to submit a budget? Yes, and that was part of that conversation with the 3985 and the 844, the work that was necessary to keep those engines running. So yes, a very comprehensive, detailed plan, which involves what it will cost, how long it will take, how much you need per year, and what we get for that. And so that's the salesman part of that is we're going to have an asset when we're done that will have at least a 3-decade usable lifespan of all this investment. And so if you think about it from a business perspective, we're investing in this asset. What is our return on it? And the return is an event like this, all the events where the locomotive travels, community outreach, employee outreach, guests of the railroad, customers, just you imagine what you could use this machine for. A rolling ambassador. And the locomotive is so good at making friends. We know the rail fans like it. How many people have heard the term foamer? Well, you're looking at a big foamer right here. What the term foamer means is I think sometimes people maybe want to use that in a disparaging way. I never take offense to it. He's a big foamer. I'm like, you're darn right I am. So sometimes when people get excited, they might get a little spittle on the corner of their lip. Or they get excited, and they start, figuratively speaking, foaming at the mouth. That's what the term foamer means. Well, we know the foamers are going to like the big boy. But in addition to the foamers, everybody likes railroads, I think, universally. But when you see a big locomotive like that, let's say you've never heard of the big boy before, and you're just going about your life in a community that we're running the big boy through, and then all of a sudden, you hear this sound that you may have never heard before. And all these people are gathering around this industrial part of town. And what's going on? And here comes this sound that's getting louder. And you see this locomotive the length of a city block. And it's 17 feet tall. And you can feel the heat radiating off of this thing. It's an impressive locomotive to watch run. And people are just smiling. There's a full range of emotions. I've encountered a lot of people who tell stories about loved ones who worked on the railroad, and you can't help but get drawn into that emotional connection. I have lots of stories. And I'm dressed as a locomotive engineer, the hat on, oftentimes a red or a scarf of some type. And there's a certain odor, a smell of smoke and oil, and this presence. And I've had people go back to that moment when Grandpa came home or Dad. It's fun. It kind of cracks me up, just, my crackly voice, because of the emotional connection that this locomotive is making with our fellow citizens. It's just remarkable. So it's very fun. I often get the question, am I allowed to share what the budget was? So for the first time, I'm going to release publicly how much we spent. It was over 25 cents. Per second. No, that's okay. Well, I'm as I said, I'm very, very privileged that they wanted to make that investment. And it's what will go down as one of the most enjoyable part of my career. But my finger right here, clicking on my mouse, approving every little penny. And interestingly enough, my plan was to rebuild another locomotive at some point. So I wanted to make sure and capture everything. So I actually archived in the form of a screenshot and have that data to this day. Every penny, every detail of what it cost and how long it took. So when the time came to do another project, I could get it closer. Because we're pretty darn close. The timing aspect of it was something that I had anticipated it would take a minimum of 5 years. And we had other circumstances where we had to work on our other locomotive, and that took 3 years of that 5.5 year timeline. So we did that locomotive from start to finish in only 2.5 years. And we didn't cut any corners, and we got it done. A lot of people didn't think we would get it done, and we literally rolled out of the house. And we just, less than 48 hours before we needed to leave. And I wanted to get some time on that locomotive rather than have all of our guests on the train in this brand new locomotive that we haven't even run yet. So we were going to run it down to Greeley, turn it around and come back. And that didn't work out. We only made it as far as none. It was getting far too late, so we just backed her right on up home, put her back in the house, made a few little tweaks and fuel adjustments, and less than 30 hours later, we were on the road. It was fun. Well, I think we have our next guest, and while Mr. Pinnell is talking, I'm going to go out in the truck, and I've got a really neat little poster that I wanted to share with everybody. So I thank you very much for all your good questions.